Greetings, fair and wonderful people across the grand and mighty spectrums of time and indeed the multiverse. I am Gordon Johans, and today I want to talk about autism and sort of other invisible illnesses. Of course, I can only talk about the ones that I actually have, and even then, the nature of the things I'm going to be talking about mean that I am not some grand comprehensive source, and I know from my own experience that when people speak as though they have the ability to lecture upon a condition that I have, that very often they don't. So my advice to you is, by all means, watch this video for information and to provide context, but use this as a guide to help bridge the gap between your understanding and the understanding of somebody else. Don't just use this as a de facto source of information, because even if I were the most highly qualified expert in the land, people's experiences of their own conditions are highly subjective. So yeah, you're gonna need to see what they think about this. This is more just me talking about this with regards to at least the information side of things, is more just so that those who have no experience or have very little experience can at least gain some kind of insight, even if it is flawed, because you can't begin learning if you don't know anything. You know, you've got to have something to begin with, some kind of context for what you're about to learn. And people who have these sorts of invisible conditions are kind of, by their nature, because people are subjective, they have their own individual take on it, and those individual takes are entirely valid when dealing with those people. So, you know, don't just dismiss them because, well, I read a book, so I know more than you, because no, things are complicated anyway. So, invisible conditions. So I'm kind of making this video because the past few days, past I suppose a couple of weeks, have really made it clear to me just how clueless even people who should know about invisible conditions are when it comes to this kind of thing. That people just don't get it, they don't understand it, and in a way, you know, I suppose there's, you know, there is this idea sometimes that kind of, the more you know on a subject, the harder it is for you to accept information that runs counter to what you understand. And so, if you think you understand how, say, autistic people are because you've done all this training, then if you see an autistic person who says, actually, you know, my experience of my condition is different, you're going to have to approach me in a different way. Then, you know, people who consider themselves experts might find themselves inclined to disagree and lecture them and say, hey, no, I know more than you and you don't know anything. And that's entirely the wrong way to go about things. And also, like, last couple of days I've been trying antidepressants because essentially the past 2 years I've been grappling with depression and suicidal thoughts, and so eventually, so kind of the way it is with my family is that, like, sort of years after a thing has become a problem, people like my family will suddenly notice and go, "Oh, that's actually a thing, is it? Oh, well, we better do something about it." So kind of like 2 years after it, 2 years after it sort of really started in earnest, my mother kind of convinced me to try antidepressants, and basically, I don't think it's worth it at this point. I kind of I made it through far harder times without the antidepressants, and frankly, at this point, I've tried them for a couple of days, and it's just this rather unpleasant sensation of my brain burning. So yeah, I mean, that's not to say that antidepressants can't work for, some other people, but that's kind of the point I want to try to make. If there is one lesson I can give to people, it's that mental illness is subjective. That it is entirely within the mind of the person with the mental illness, and that should be respected and taken into account, and that you can't disagree, right, with someone's personal feelings on how they feel. And so yeah, I'm stopping the antidepressants, but it's all sort of had me thinking about mental illness and about how people see mental illness. And at the same time, the friends of mine have actually sort of pointed out to me that they like the more in-depth videos, and I've kind of been feeling like there needs to be a sort of follow-up to the Autistic People Are Superior Beings video for some time. So I suppose this is sort of it. So we all sort of have this idea in our head of what mental illness looks like. And this idea that is trained through popular culture. And it is very often trained in problematic ways, and that we see mental illness presented in popular culture within the extreme. When we see sort of people who have, say, issues with disassociation and hearing voices, we think of, like, Jekyll and Hyde. When we think of sort of anger management issues, we think of the Hulk. And we think of depression as kind of the sort of the outsider's version of goth and emo culture, of just like, oh my god, my life is so horrible, I must go and write all these songs about how my life sucks. And this is where we get, there's sort of this myth that people, that people try to commit suicide for attention, Let's be honest, guys. If someone tries to commit suicide for attention, they're mentally ill. They need help. Right. It doesn't matter even if they are genuinely doing it because they are an arrogant, egotistical narcissist who is literally just doing it because it is the only way they can get attention. They need help. Normal, sane people do not try to commit suicide to get attention. Right? So yeah, absolutely. If someone is expressing suicidal tendencies, that's a problem. We see and are trained to see mental illnesses in the extreme, in the stereotype. I mean, we're even seeing this in the approaches to like Donald Trump, that we're not trying to say he's not fit for office because, you know, he's a rapist and a racist and he's a fascist and he's going against the Constitution. No, people are saying, look, he's mad. You know, they're coming up with all kinds of psychological diagnoses, but they're basically just pulling fancy sounding words out of their asses and going, look, see, he's not normal. He shouldn't have power. And, you know, to a certain extent, I can understand that idea, because it's like, yeah, I am personally of the opinion that that people who are severely mentally ill should not have guns, because I mean that they especially shouldn't have guns compared to, you know, even neurotypical people who, again, I have expressed that I don't think should have guns, because, you know, apart from anything else, it's a danger to themselves as well as to other people. So I can get if you're expressing it from a sort of your concern for Donald Trump's mental health, which, let's face it, you know, I want to stay away from politics where I can, but let's face it, this is a guy who is essentially the most powerful man in the world at the moment, and he is reacting like a spoiled 5-year-old upset that he isn't getting a 6th present because SNL decided to rip the piss into him. Like, dude, if this keeps offending you, you stop watching it. And if this is some sort of alt-right thing against safe spaces, dude, you clearly need a safe space because you're clearly very hurt by this, right? If you are deeply upset by something you cannot change, then, you know, stop letting it affect you. Stop engaging in this thing that is making you feel shitty. And I know that's, you know, arguably could attract me a great deal of hatred among my friends and peers, because I am actually showing some sort of humility for, you know, Donald Trump's mental health, sort of sympathy for his mental health and the fact that, you know, clearly he does have some issues, but like, mental health is still something that is seen as the boogeyman. That we don't get, we don't understand. Even people who are not neurotypical, as is the term. By the way, if you don't know, neurotypical is basically what people who have mental health issues call people who don't have mental health issues. It's like, if autistic people are wizards, then the muggles are neurotypicals. So Although I suppose that's maybe not a good analogy, because that suggests that what we really need is a complete segregation from society of autistic people, which no. Um, yeah, so when it comes to invisible conditions, we used to the standout cases. We used to the people with the severe conditions. You know, people like my friend who can't leave the house because it's all just too loud and too many people, and like he can't filter what he's saying, and he just eats up toast. Like when we think of people with mental illness, we think of the extremes. You know. And I suppose it's like when we think of people with disabilities, we think of people in wheelchairs. You know, that's literally like the sign for disabled parking and stuff, is wheelchair. We think of people who are, you know, the sort of the horrible term that, you know, fortunately nobody really uses anymore, you know, cripple. Like the idea that you cannot function. I mean, the whole idea of disabled, that you are not able to function anymore. Whereas people with physical disabilities can have physical disabilities that are swiftly or relatively easily managed. I mean, glasses. Glasses is technically, that's me having a disability, because without my glasses, I can't really see. You know, I can't read the words on my shirt on the screen in front of me. I just sort of seeing one vague pink blob, and then sort of a large red blob with some sort of white blobs, and then more pink blobs. You know, I can't make out detail. Sort of, I suppose that I have to get to about here before I can even see in any kind of detail. And yet with my glasses I can function fine. And similarly, there are people who have who've got hearing difficulties, and so they have hearing aids. And there are people who, you know, who've lost limbs and what have you, and they have prostheses, and they go about society. Like people who have got genuine disabilities but have tools that enable them to function in society just fine. And the thing is that when it comes to the mental health equivalence, we understand as a society the people with severe mental health, or at least we understand enough to identify them. We might have very poorly conceived understandings of them. We might have a great deal of bigotry and discrimination towards them, even people with sort of milder forms of mental disabilities, or mental illnesses. We might have our own biases and bigotry towards them, but at least culturally we are trained to have an awareness of that sort of mental illness. We are trained to be able to identify and therefore understand and therefore have a concept and context for it, right? And therefore we know what to do in that situation. Or at least we know more. We have some kind of fucking clue what to do. And so the issue then becomes with invisible disabilities. and I'm going to take a break here because we're getting to 20 minutes, and so I'm thinking this is probably going to run to an hour long, and I want to make sure that the first part of the video renders relatively quickly, so excuse me, the jump cut. Right. Okay, so there is a fundamental dichotomy that that goes on with people who have an invisible mental illness, okay? Which is that, yes, to use sort of, I suppose, identity politics parlance, you can pass as neurotypical. And so therefore you have theoretically the ability to go without being discriminated. At the same time, that ambiguity can screw you over. Because if you are someone who is severely mentally ill, then we are, as society, trained to treat those people with some kind of respect and understanding, or at least the bigots, the real, genuine, discriminating bigots, understand that they can't go around discriminating people like that, or they're gonna get treated like shit. Because you don't go around discriminating against people for psychological conditions. But when it comes to the subtle stuff, it gets difficult. Because, say, for me, I could work, and I want to work. Indeed, there was no happier time for me in the last 2 years than the 3 days I thought I had a job, and I basically had a daily commute in to this office, and even though I spent a good deal of that time basically with a horrendous cold, blowing my nose out, it was still a tremendous experience for me, and I felt awesome thinking that I could work, thinking that, yes, I have an admin job here that I could do. Of course, it then turned out that essentially I was too qualified for the job and they couldn't actually afford to pay me, so still unemployed. But the point is, I wanted to work, I want to work, and I love working, as do many people who have conditions, right? Like, we want to work, and we can work. The problem, however, is that we have to get through the interview process. And again, right, I can't speak for everybody on the autistic spectrum. I can't speak for everybody with some kind of invisible illness as regards to how they might feel about certain subjects, but I feel like, I suppose it's a primer to at least give some context, because again, as already discussed, I think the fact that, you know, like Jekyll and Hyde and the Hulk, as genuinely terrible a sort of primer on how to identify and treat people with mental illness as they are, at least they give some kind of understanding for them, and hopefully my perspective from my experiences is going to be slightly more helpful and useful and insightful than those. So, for me, I found that my autism works such that I can function in society so long as I know the rules, right? And it is a conscious thing that I have to do. I have to play to the audience. I have to know the audience I am playing to. I have to have the energy to do this, and I have to sort of update my understanding of social stuff by sort of spending time with people and sort of seeing how people behave and sort of adjusting to the social norms, because the social norms change, because culture changes, because times change, and style and what have you. And so if you are someone for whom social mores are difficult, then that's an issue. Indeed, that's the problem I face right now, is that I can function in society. I can pass in society. But if I get tired, if I get distracted, if I get stressed, if I don't know the person, if I don't know the context, I can very easily say the wrong thing and offend people. And where if I were more like, I know someone who is much farther along the autistic spectrum than I am, and by the way, if you are watching my videos and you think I am some extremely autistic moron, then you are living in a fantasy land, my friend. You are living in a fucking fantasy land if you think that I am extremely autistic. Because I am, in fact, actually very high functioning and have mild Asperger's syndrome. And if you disagree, fuck you, you know bullshit. Although, admittedly, the past 2 years haven't been kind to my autism, because, yeah, when your understanding and ability to handle social scenarios is dependent upon having regular sort of regular practice in social scenarios, then essentially spending 2 years as a hermit doesn't do much good for you. But no, as I was saying, I know someone who is much farther along the autistic spectrum than I am, to the point where they can't even go outside, and they have no control or filter over what they say. They can't think about what they're saying before they say it. They have to literally just say whatever is at the top of their head. And they can't think about it at all. But because of that, right, they can have someone to essentially act as an interpreter, right? Like, they are... And they actually mentioned this to me, that kind of, like, even they feel this sense that, like, there's almost a blessing to be found in being more severely mentally ill, because the more severely mentally ill you are, the less you know about it. And, like, even for him, he's very aware of his limitations, and he is very annoyed about them. And he is very angry about these limitations, and about the fact that he wants to be out there and speaking to people and talking to people, but he just can't, because his brain won't let him. And I feel a sort of similar sense of envy towards his situation, because as he is so severely autistic, he can have he relies on and and he can cope with having essentially a neurotypical interpreter in the middle. Whereas my issue is that because I am so high functioning, I can't handle somebody else being in the room trying to act as a neurotypical interpreter. Because I'm just like, no, bugger off, I can do this myself, right up until the moment I fuck it up because I'm stressed or distracted or just I don't have it entirely correct. It's sort of, it's like there is a translation issue going on, you know. It's like I'm trying to translate it into neurotypical language, and every so often I get it wrong. Every so often I get the mannerisms, or I pick the wrong subject or stuff like that, and I genuinely lay up at night sort of freaking out, going, oh my god, I fucked it up, I shouldn't have said that, because in the heat of the moment it feels right, and then you sort of realise, shit. And if you're a neurotypical person who is, you know, identifying with that scenario, yeah, like, that's the thing. If you're high functioning, if you have an invisible illness, you don't have a big thing, a big differentiation. You just have lots of little moments that hold you back. And because I have another element to my sort of issue, in that I have growth hormone deficiency, which basically means I don't have the energy. I don't have it. Which means that when your Asperger's syndrome is kind of, when your ability to function with your Asperger's syndrome is dependent upon your energy, that's not good. And that's basically why I've got a massive caffeine addiction. Because it's literally like the only way I can function in society is by having the caffeine and the energy to sort of interact with people at all. And that's actually why I can get so little done, is because I don't have the energy to do stuff. And because just being happy takes, well, not even being happy, just, you know, feeling like you can keep on going takes so much energy. I mean, you know, this overlaps with things like, you know, depression and anxiety, right? Like, yes, there are people who have severe depression, and, you know, they do take, you know, antidepressants, or they see counsellors and psychiatrists, and even in those cases, right, you can have depression and still try to function in society, and still, you know, try and hold down a job, try and do university and stuff like that. But it screws you up in the subtle ways, in small ways, in ways that just sort of trip you up. And I really feel like that we as a society need to get better at treating people with invisible mental illnesses. Because, you know, I've mentioned before in other videos that essentially my issue right now, the reason I suppose that I was on the antidepressants, and the reason why I suppose I'm going to be, until this problem is solved, for some definition of suicidal, is the fact that because of my autism and, you know, by Kalman syndrome and growth hormone deficiency, I'm basically never going to be able to get a job. I can work, I want to work, but ultimately, to get the job, it's me in a room with a bunch of strangers, and I haven't a fucking clue what to say. So compared to everybody else, I'm always going to lose. Because you got you know, graduates who are fresh off the boat, who are young and eager, and they know what to say. You've got people who are coming out of retirement who've got, you know, a lifetime of experience and references, and then there's me with a degree in creative and professional writing and film studies, and a YouTube channel where I have admitted to having a tiny penis and tits. Yeah, I'm not going to do well. I'm just not going to do well. And so I am dependent on the welfare state to live, right? Or at least I am going to be at some point, because, well, to be fucking cold, at some point, my parents who are supporting me are going to be dead. You know, even if they want to keep supporting me until that point, even if they are able to keep supporting me until that point, at some point, their support is going to stop one way or the other. And so therefore, I am going to be dependent upon the welfare state. And currently, my problem is that because I am so high functioning and could theoretically work, I can't qualify for disability pay. I just can't, right? Like, you might be looking at this going, ah, well, my sister, cousin, aunt, whatever qualifies for disability pay. Yeah, well, I can't. I can't. End of. And at the same time, my brain just can't deal with the sort of the treadmill required in order to get sort of the social security payments from the welfare state are needed if you are what is known as a job seeker. If you are someone who can work and wants to work and just needs to, you know, help getting by until you can work. Because if the criteria were graded on, you know, how much actual substantive work you did towards getting a job, then I could do that. Because it's time-based, my brain just, it can't compute it. It's Zeno's paradox. It's just like, well, the more effort I put in, the more impossible it gets. And also, you know, there's like, the thing is that, you know, when it comes to the issue of universal credit, right, you need to spend, you know, say 20 hours a week in order to get universal credit payments. Well, you know, there's only a certain radius around where you live that you can get to, so therefore there is only a certain radius for which you can find jobs within that area. Then there is, within that limited pool, only a certain amount of jobs that you could do, and then within that limited pool again, there is only a certain amount of jobs that you are qualified to do, that are on offer, and that can accept you. And, you know, the actual applying for a job functionally like takes 5 seconds maybe, because it's just like, you know, sending off the application through Reed, send off the CV, and then there, you know, then there is the refresh rate. Then there is the fact that, you know, frequently when you're looking for a job, right, that same job will be posted many times across multiple different search engines. So what seems like a lot more jobs is actually a lot fewer jobs. And so you end up in this situation whereby you can very swiftly calculate that the jobs are just done. The ability to look for jobs is just done and gone. And, you know, that's it. You know, you can't get 10 hours out of it, never mind 20. Never mind 20 each fucking week, because that's from a fresh search. Never mind the fact that you've then got to have never mind, then the jobs have to refresh, and yeah, it's difficult. So yeah, I'm basically screwed. You know, I am staring down the barrel of a gun, and I know that unless the welfare state improves, or I hit the fucking jackpot, in terms of managing to have someone see my CV and then actually not think me a complete fucking weirdo in the interview, right? At some point, the money's going to run out. I'm not going to be able to go to the welfare state for money to survive, and yeah, I'm going to die. Because thanks to my invisible illness, I can't get support in that regard. And it's like there is support out there for autistic people, but it's all support intended to help autistic children, right? Because the idea is that you give autistic children the best start in life, you give them the best sort of, you help them to get the best grades, you help them have the least traumatic childhood possible, help them learn more social skills so that they can grow up and they can become functioning adults. But once you are actually an autistic adult, there is the issue that nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares, and there really isn't any help for you. Like, because basically, like, I mean, it is something that my family is sort of desperately trying, is like, help for autistic people, and thing is, they're really, like, I'm high functioning. I can function in society. But ultimately, it is me in that interview room on my own. And I'm gonna screw it up. And at the same time, right, there is this sort of psychological element that goes on in that the people who contact the Autistic Society are a self-selecting group of people who have severe conditions, right? And yeah, we might be being driven to the National Autistic Society out of desperation, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to help, because National Autistic Society, kind of by definition, is for people who are at the more extreme ends of the spectrum, right? They're for people who kind of can't make a CV, who can't do the basic stuff, right? Like, getting help from a society that helps autistic people can be invaluable if you are really autistic, if you are so much farther along the spectrum, because they can then radically improve the chances from, say, 0.5% to 3%, which is a massive improvement if you consider that it's, you know, that it's improving it by, you know, like 600%, right? It's still 3% of likelihood of actually getting a job, but it's still a massive improvement, right? There is a lot more improvement to be done for people who are that much more seriously affected by their conditions than there are if you are high functioning. If you are high functioning, then you are effectively, there really isn't much that can be done for you, because yeah, you know, it's like, yeah, help writing a CV, help sending out cover letters, maybe sort of coaching for sort of things to say and do in the interview scenario. Still ultimately just you in that room, though. And it's like, I don't, and funnily enough, you know, for me, actually having some sort of carer or helper along would only hinder me, because it's just another person in the room that I then have to play to. And actually, this is where kind of, I suppose, some of my mansplainy, sort of shouting over women tendencies come from, is because, you know, I am used to being the loser of the group, and so I sort of project this bombastic persona of like, look at me, because the more you're sort of shouting about look at me, the more people try to ignore you. Whereas if you are the quiet weirdo in the corner, then all the little sadistic fuckers turn to look at you. Whereas if you are kind of bombastic, saying look at me, then all the, you know, sadistic fuckers kind of go, he's too strong, we can't target him. Or at least if they do try to target you, then they are drowned out by all the other people. And the thing is that whilst when you're putting on the sort of bombastic persona, talking to all these people, you might seem in the moment to be very high functioning and to know how to talk to people. You are making loads of little tiny screw ups and embarrassing yourself in 1,000 different ways. And when you go home that night, those little things just gonna niggle away at you, just peck away and eat away at you, just like you fucked that up, 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 you fucked that up. And the thing is that our society really doesn't understand or respect people who have got invisible illnesses, and we don't have any understanding of people with invisible illnesses. And indeed, you know, the fact that if you have an invisible illness, you're kind of fucked when it comes to the idea of identity politics. Because the nature of an invisible illness is that it is a subjective thing. It is small. It is subtle. It's like walking around the world with your shoelaces, sort of tied to each other. So the shoes, your shoes are tied to each other. Like, you can walk if you've got practice, you can run, but you're gonna stumble, you're gonna trip a lot. And compared to other people who can't use their feet at all, you're gonna seem like the most privileged arsehole in the world. And yet, compared to all the neurotypical people, you are a fuck up who keeps fucking up. And this, in this age of identity politics, having an invisible illness really doesn't get you treated with any respect. In the sense that it's just kind of the sort of the nerdy, virginal, autistic white man has kind of become the enemy of the internet, right? You know, the jocks in popular culture are still sort of the enemy of the world, in that they're the sort of they're the rapists in society, but the nerds are the people who are kind of creepy to girls online and who waste their time creating viruses and shit like that. And nobody, like, there is a drastic issue at the moment with men committing suicide, and nobody really cares. Nobody really cares, or at least when they've covered it, they've basically said, yeah, it's men's fault, they don't talk enough. Fuck them. And I think the thing is that, like, so many people who are sort of who are not privileged, so we say, who are affected by discrimination in society, they have some kind of clique or culture or community that they can turn to for help. Whereas if you are a young man with an invisible condition, then society really doesn't give a crap. Because, I mean, the fact that still the biggest insults to a man are to, you know, to effectively call him autistic, to say that he doesn't have a girlfriend, to insult the size of his penis, to call him a virgin, like, all these things that kind of, well, okay, not the size of the penis, but, like, you know, where a lot of these things are kind of things that just sort of happen as a result of having some sort of invisible condition and being man. Because, like, and granted, there are a lot of, you know, societal and cultural reasons for this, but women have much more of a sense of culture and community and talking and understanding of with each other when there are problems. Men don't. Men, when we have problems, we hide away and we self-medicate. Because we're embarrassed, because we don't want to talk to people. And certainly in my case, this has led to actually a great deal more problems for me than if I had actually just bit the bullet and acknowledged I had a problem when I was much younger. We have an issue as sort of men in society that we don't know how to treat mental illness, how to treat invisible mental illnesses within our society. Like, if someone has Alzheimer's, if someone has dementia, or they have violent mood swings or whatever, we kind of know how to deal with that because of pop cultural understanding. We can identify severe cases of issues. The subtle stuff we just can't handle, we just can't take, we just don't know how to deal with, even when it comes to ourselves, because we have no pop cultural understanding of, I don't know, if someone can't communicate effectively, what do we do? I mean, indeed, this whole culture of pedanting and correcting, and sort of, I suppose, snark and sarcasm, it's all really taking the piss out of people who can't communicate effectively, out of people who say, on the autistic spectrum, or on the ADHD spectrum, or whatever. People who don't have good attention spans, people who find it difficult to communicate in social situations, right? We take the piss out of them. We insult them, and we think ourselves smart for doing so. We praise the people who sort of who outsmart and belittle those who can't communicate effectively. And we think these, bullies of the socially inept as being cool and charismatic because look at them, they're correcting someone who has an inability to communicate effectively. Look at them, aren't they so great? And this whole idea of sort of cultural belonging and us and them, and that if you don't belong, you are an other to be discriminated against. It's very much here, even in left-wing communities. This whole idea of memes and shitposting. If you don't understand what's going on, if you don't get the joke, then you become the joke. And if you are already someone who has got an invisible condition, that's not nice. We call this, the bubbles, the echo chambers, but like, there are people who want to belong and are trying to belong, but they just can't quite get it. They're just they just have difficulty understanding, they just have difficulty communicating, and they're discriminated against because we can't take the risk that these good, kind, misguided, and sort of disabled people might not actually just be a bunch of sadistic morons trying to make a joke. And that's among the parts of society that you would think are more likely to be forgiving and understanding. You know, the communities that you would think are sort of the kind of profess themselves safe havens for the broken and disillusioned, they're actually the worst places to have any kind of issue communicating or understanding effectively, because these so-called safe havens are only safe havens by essentially perpetrating witch hunts against anybody they deem to be problematic. And if you have some kind of invisible condition, the chances are you fuck things up occasionally. You get things wrong occasionally, you say the wrong thing, you get the wrong end of the stick, and so therefore you're problematic. And so therefore you end up in situations whereby there really is no place where you can go to be free of hate. Because the kinds of places which are going to be free of hate are the kinds of places that are going to discriminate against you because they can't tell the difference. So, yeah, we've got a problem with when it comes to the invisible conditions of society. I have no answers. I really don't. All I can say is that if you know someone who has an invisible condition, talk to them about it, right? See what they think about their condition and get their perspective, right? Because I have tried so many times to try to explain to my mother, who is a trained, psychiatric nurse, as to what it is like to have my condition, but it's like she's learned from books how autistic people are, and so she can't now take hearing from someone with autism how it feels to actually have autism. I suppose the fact that it is a spectrum does not occur to people, right? They think that it is this one unified blob of stuff, that if you are autistic, that you are just autistic. Whereas no, I suppose it's like the idea that we think that you can just cure cancer, as though cancer is one thing, when it's in fact loads of little different things that are each a form of cancer. And it's like, autism is not one condition. It is loads of little conditions with loads of different symptoms that all happen to come under the broad spectrum and term of autism, right? I mean, the fact that they have now incorporated Asperger's syndrome into autism just makes it so much more confusing, right? I mean, there is this idea in sort of the sort of identity politics and sort of the LGBTQA plus sort of community, that like macro labels, big labels, are a kind of a safe thing, because you don't want to have to explain that, you know, that you are, say, a non-binary person who feels, you know, romantic feelings towards women, but you don't feel sexual feelings or whatever. So instead, you just want to be able to say something big, blocky, that people have some vague concept of, and thus know sort of how to treat you. And so, you know, one of those terms being queer. But autistic isn't like... Calling someone autistic isn't like calling them queer, right? In the sense that when you are labeling someone with a macro label of mental illness, you are not giving someone a handy understanding of how to treat you. What you are essentially doing is handing someone a massive set of misunderstandings so that they don't have a fucking clue what you're about, but they think they do, right? It is far better to say, ah, yes, I have mild Asperger's syndrome, or some other, you know, say that you have, like, some grand, some sort of understanding of autism, like, I don't know. Yes, I have got St. James's autism. Yes, it's a very particular subset. It's always better to sort of say that than it is to just say autism, because it is far better that someone doesn't know what the fuck you've got and thus has to learn than it is that they think they know what you've got when they don't know, right? Because it is far better that they learn how to treat you from you than it is that they think they know how to treat you when they don't. And so, yeah, I suppose to reiterate, rounding out, if you know someone with an invisible condition, if you know someone who has got, you know, some sort of mental illness that lets them function in society and that they are high functioning about, talk to them. See what they feel about the issues they face and get their perspective. Because you can read all the fucking books in the world. You can go to university and study and become a fucking psychiatrist. It doesn't fucking matter. At the end of the day, a person's experience of their own condition is going to be individual. It is going to be their own thing. And that doesn't mean that these people can then necessarily go around the world dictating what other people can or cannot write. I mean, I know autistic people who get very angry at actors and writers for not understanding autism or for belittling it. Or for belittling people with it. But like, I am a writer, and I feel like the point of art is to be expression for the artist. The point of art is not necessarily to be what the audience wants. You know, I feel like if you look at the art in the world and you don't see what you want to see, that you should go out and create your own art. Or at the very least, that you should go out and commission your own art from someone. this idea of criticism and boycotting of art because you don't like it doesn't sit well with me, because it's all very well when it's, you know, a bunch of autistic people saying, you know, they want to boycott the Big Bang Theory because its portrayal of autism is problematic. I'm not saying that's actually happened, although I could well understand it, not least because the Big Bang Theory isn't actually funny. But it's a dangerous precedent set, because the moment that you say that political groups can start, the moment that you say affected political groups can start throwing their weight around because they don't like what's in a piece of art, then, well, then that's how we get sort of, you know, Nazis and misogynists saying that they don't like Mad Max Fury Road or Star Wars Rogue One because, oh my god, there are women in it! How can there be women in films? It's a feminist conspiracy, I told you! I feel like, you know, if, and apart from anything else, like, expecting a neurotypical person to be able to accurately portray on screen what it feels like to be autistic is always going to, it's never going to work. Expecting a cis person to accurately portray what it's like to be trans, expecting a man to accurately portray what it's like to be a woman, like, of course they're going to fail. The only person who can accurately portray what it is like to be you is you. And the job of critics and fandoms are to praise what is done right and to learn from what is done wrong. Not to go around screaming at things we don't like because, oh my god, they're saying things that disagree with my politics. Although I suppose it's not really politics if, you know, your condition is your reality. But at the same time, if we're going to criticize things for being unreal, then, you know, like, that's, well, it's fiction. Fiction perverts reality in order to make plots and conflict. And I feel like okay, this is taking a turn. But yeah, I feel like perverting criticism into being a politically motivated tool to decide what is and is not acceptable, that's problematic, because it's all very well when it's like feminists saying this film is misogynistic, you can't see it. But the moment that we sort of accept that a minority of people can control what the majority of people watch because they don't like it, then we are basically handing the keys of power to the fascists, because they can then, because there is then the precedent laid down for them to say, ah, well, you know, you can't watch this film because it's all horrific, you know, Muslim propaganda. So yeah, talk to autistic people and sort of see their perspective on things. And incidentally, I would love to see, you know, autistic people make more films about what it is like to really have autism. And I think what it would really need to be, the way it would really need to work is that you'd need to have a neurotypical writer on board to sort of more realistically write how the other characters would react. So that way you can capture that dissonance more effectively. But yeah, ultimately the only way to understand people with an invisible condition is to talk to them, is to get their perspective. And what we need is for all people with invisible conditions to have a palpable impact upon pop culture. And hopefully with things like YouTube, and Vimeo and Dailymotion, and even Facebook video now, hopefully now people with invisible conditions can start to make films and art showcasing what it feels like to have an invisible condition, so that there can be some pop cultural awareness and understanding of this. Because we do, as a culture, need to get better at treating people with invisible conditions. And I don't just say that as someone with an invisible condition, well, with more than with a couple. I also say that as someone who is himself, who does himself have issues with people with invisible conditions, who needs to improve. And I think we all can do with improving, and so yeah, let's improve as a society. So there we are. That is over and out on invisible conditions. I have been Gordon Johans, and you have been very, very welcome. See you. Thank you to all my Patreons at patreon.com for helping to make videos like this possible. If you wish to leave a like or dislike to rate the video for my analytics, that would be much appreciated. Comments are always welcome, though be aware that they will be moderated before being published, so please be civil. If you liked this video, please consider adding it to your favourites, sharing it to your friends, or subscribing. If you wish to help me out, or my channels, please consider whitelisting my videos in your adblock software, subscribing for monthly donations through Patreon, or giving a small one-off donation. Alternatively, I have a Steam wishlist for games I would consider Let's Playing or streaming, so if you would like to see me broken before the Dark Souls altar, or just happen to have gotten a duplicate of a game in a humble bundle, then you know what to do. I also have an official Facebook fan page, Twitter account, Tumblr, Reddit and blog, so you can stay up to date with all of my videos, blog articles and the things I care about. Links are in the video description. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I think that all that now needs to be said is ban all guns, institute universal basic income now, and ensure government is elected by proportional representation. Oh, and also, fuck the racists and fuck the alt-right.